Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here on Swish City. I'm your host, Bruce Veliz, and in today's episode, we're going to be diving in and exploring the Philadelphia 76ers as we break down their NBA off-season and look at their season preview going into the 2025-2026 NBA year. We're doing this for every single team leading up to the start of this season, and we've already tackled an abundance of teams in the Eastern Conference. So if you missed those videos, definitely check them out. If you are a Sixers fan, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section on my takes with the Philadelphia 76ers. And without further ado, let's dive in and let's break down this team. So ultimately, to start off this year, the Sixers are in a little bit of a weird spot in my eyes, as I think they do have some pieces that could keep them afloat and could keep them at the top. With dealing with injuries that we've seen the last couple of seasons and having players that have had injury-riddled seasons, it does leave a lot of question marks surrounding this roster, this core, and who's going to be there once we get to the end of the season. We saw that very similarly last year when the Sixers team, after they signed Paul George, was projected to be a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference and to be one of the favorites to come out of there. Ultimately, the Paul George mesh work did not really blend well, as he had to deal with some injuries and didn't fit in the best with the Sixers. And B dealt with some injuries, Maxey dealt with injuries, McCain dealt with injuries. It was just an absolute mess. And the Sixers ultimately, because of that, ended up tanking, going towards the bottom of the Eastern Conference, and ended up landing the number 3 overall pick, putting them into a sort of position to really kind of figure out what they want to do. Do they want to keep some of these star players and kind of utilize trying to keep winning, or do they want to go into this youth movement as guys like Jared McCain, last year their rookie, was set to be the rookie of the year before he got injured. Tyrese Maxey was looking like a dominant young guard as well, and now they just drafted with the 3rd overall pick a wing in VJ Edgecombe, who has looked solid in his first preseason game, which is happening as we are recording this very moment, with them taking on the New York Knicks. But the Sixers in this weekend Eastern Conference are a little bit confusing, as like I mentioned, they have some veterans, they have some younger players, and it's really uncertain on what direction this team is really going to go through with this season. I have a little bit of a prediction myself, and we'll get into that right here as we dive in and explore the 76ers. So let's look at who they added, and they brought in 3 players to this roster, and that was Dominic Barlow, Jabari Walker, and Trendon Watford. Now, these 3 players are ones that, have had some experience in the NBA playing in some rotations and trying to find themselves out, but haven't really stuck into any rotations to be a key player for those teams. Trendon Watford had bounced around between the Blazers and the Nets and was someone that a lot of people thought could, turn into a solid role player for a Nets team. Didn't end up doing so, but now is looking to do that in Philadelphia. Jabari Walker is coming in on a 2-way alongside Dominic Barlow from the Atlanta Hawks, trying to add some help into this, wing / power forward position for this Sixers team, as that's clearly been a hole for them, who to play next to Joel Embiid and how that's going to realistically fit. They also, like I mentioned, drafted VJ Edgecombe and Janai Broome, 2 players that I think are going to be pretty solid for this Sixers team. Edgecombe, like I mentioned, kind of fits in well on the wing with Maxey and McCain being those 2 young guards. He is just another piece to add as someone that can kind of cut to the basket and make waves, while McCain and Maxey kind of hang out from the perimeter. And then Broome, obviously, was one of the better bigs in college through the last couple of seasons. Last year, specifically his senior year at the Combine, looked a little worse, where his stock ultimately did end up falling because he couldn't really jump, wasn't as athletic as many people thought he could be at this level, maybe holding him back, but could be someone to blossom and be a nice, second round pick for the Sixers. With taking the upside and potential from college, I like that move. And then with their 2-way players, Hunter Sallis, Jabari Walker, Dominic Barlow, 2 players that I just mentioned, in Barlow and Walker coming over from the Blazers and Hawks, really kind of see where this Sixers team is going into this youth direction, with kind of just taking the flyers on the wall and just hoping that one of them or a couple of them can stick and actually make into their rotation, because this team has tried to go in the all-out win mode with getting players like Paul George, Joel Embiid, Kyle Lowry, Eric Gordon, these veterans to really come take over. Reggie Jackson last year, and doesn't really work out, as those guys are seemingly injured or getting past their primes to where they're not as effective as they would be as some of these younger players, where if they do blossom or they do stick, you could have them for 3 to 4 seasons. So I'm liking where the 76ers are going. I think going into this youth direction is smarter, and that's why I think we're going to see them kind of be a little bit towards the bottom-ish of the Eastern Conference this year. So now let's dive in and let's look at who the Sixers ended up losing this off season. They did losing a lot of players, and they did draft, they did bring some guys in, but they did lose a lot of their guys. So they didn't end up trading anybody, but they had 3 people leave in free agency. Jared Butler, who was brought in only at the second half of the season. And you'll see with the 76ers here, a lot of these players that did end up leaving were second half players when the Sixers basically were tanking, had Joel Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain out, and they were just running all these young guns. That's where a guy like Quentin Grimes was able to really succeed for this team and earn himself that payday, which we'll get into when we talk about Grimes at the end of all of this. But Butler was from the Wizards, brought in at the second half of the year to try to work himself to a standard contract and to stay in the NBA. Fortunately, with the 76ers, they did not value that as much. They just ended up letting him go because they want to kind of give these players that they drafted or, have had in their system that have kind of developed that opportunity. And Butler wasn't one of them. He was just a random guy that they traded for. He goes to the Suns on an Exhibit 9 looking to make their guaranteed roster. Alex Reese was one of their two-ways that they ultimately ended up having. He ends up just basically swapping with Jabari Walker kind of funnily, you know what I mean? Reese was a two-way, Walker was a two-way. Now they're just swapping spots where he goes to Portland, and it's kind of funny like that. And then Gershon Yabusele, the biggest name from the 76ers, the one that I ultimately thought they were going to keep this off season, ends up leaving and going to the New York Knicks. But with the players in Andre Drummond, Kelly Oubre, Eric Gordon opting into these contracts and having a lot of salary cap and needing the flexibility for Quentin Grimes, which we just saw came down to the very last minute, which once again we'll get into in a little bit later. What did make sense for Gershon to go somewhere else if the Sixers weren't going to give him the money that he deserved. Not that he got a big deal contract, but he got a 2-year, I believe, $6 million deal, which for Gershon Yabusele, someone who came into the NBA as a draft and stash by the Boston Celtics, never really had an opportunity, but found himself last year succeeding with Team France, playing with Victor Wembanyama in the Olympics and gaining himself back to the NBA. I think this is a great revitalization story for Gershon Yabusele, and I think as a fan of players coming in from Europe and transitioning back to the NBA and finding themselves back, I think this is going to be good. He's a pretty solid scorer at that power forward center position, can be a small ball 5, spaces the floor, pretty solid 3-point shooter, someone that I think is going to be more effective for the New York Knicks because they lacked that in that role with Precious Achiuwa last season. They needed that kind of spacing, shooting big man, and now they do have that in Gershon Yabusele. They also ended up losing some other players as well, just basically letting these guys go. Jalen Hood-Schifino being one of them, Jeff Doughton Jr. being another, and then Ricky Council the fourth. Personally, out of all of these 3 players, the one that sticks out to me was Ricky Council the fourth. He played at Arkansas. He was this gritty, grimy player for the 76ers and kind of reminded me a little bit of Matisse Thybulle, kind of that really impactful defender for this Sixers team that can't really shoot, not the best on the offensive side, but can play multiple positions, can help guard 2 through 4, and can be very effective on that end as an on-ball defender. Now, unfortunately for Ricky Council, he doesn't get to stick with the Sixers after a couple of years of trying to prove that, and then tried to get with the Brooklyn Nets, but dealing with an injury, was not brought into training camp. We'll still see if Ricky Council does get an opportunity with the Nets throughout the season. I would expect he will, because the Nets actively wanted him through the offseason, but that is something to keep an eye on with these Philadelphia 76ers, is that Ricky Council is still available in free agency. And then 2 players from the Sixers team went over and signed overseas, and those 2 players were ones that came to the Sixers at the end of the season to get some end-of-the-year contracts, those being O'Shea Brissett and Lonnie Walker IV. Lonnie Walker, as we know, last year went over to Europe after trying to compete for the Celtics, then came back to the NBA, played with the Sixers, looked pretty solid, and now is going back over again overseas as he couldn't find himself a contract in the NBA this year, once again in free agency after a little bit of a bounce back with the Sixers. And then O'Shea Brissett, someone who was offered a contract by the Celtics, wanted to test free agency, ultimately ended up being a mistake as he didn't get signed and then had to compete on some G League teams, starting off with the Long Island Nets and then working his way up to getting into the Philadelphia 76ers as they needed another rotational guy. They brought Brissett in, but he once again will be going overseas and playing over there with Lonnie Walker. So both of those players, ones that I have watched as, being a fan of the Celtics and trying to see them compete in training camps and stuff like that, players that I have rooted for are now officially overseas and no longer in the NBA. But who knows? Like a player in Gershon Yabusele was able to come back. Maybe these guys could also work that into their skill sets. And before we dive into the depth chart, let's talk about the main man in the room, Quentin Grimes, as he signed a deal just the other day, the qualifying offer, a 1-year, $8 million deal. And this is going to ultimately allow Grimes to play out the season and then see what the Sixers want to do, very similar to a guy in Cam Thomas. To me, what this screams is that Grimes isn't really as big as the future plans for the Sixers as he would like to be a part of with securing that long-term deal. I think last year, once again, with those guys dealing with injuries, he looked a lot better than he would perceive to be on a normal team, with him being, the third or fourth man on that roster. And I think this season we're going to see that toned down a little bit. Obviously, I still think he's a valuable three-point shooter. He's a great off-ball threat. He's a perfect defender, someone who has that kind of complementary both parts of their game to really be a solid piece for the 76ers. But once again, with them having so many players that kind of play this role and play that position, right? VJ Edgecomb's kind of a 2-3. Tyrese Maxey plays that one. They want to work Jared McCain into the starting lineup. Quentin Grimes doesn't really fit, right? And with him being the guy that was just recently traded for, someone that was not drafted by the Sixers team, someone that this front office has not put their full 100% belief in, it would make sense if he was kind of the odd man out. Now, with the 76ers, we'll have to wait and see how that does pertain this season, because if Grimes does still continue to go off, he could ultimately be pried out by the 76ers and they get nothing for him. Or we could see an opportunity where they do a sign and trade, or where Grimes is ultimately not virtually as good as he was last season at the end of the half with the Sixers and is able to take a little bit more of a payment of a cheaper deal to go back to the Sixers to play a more comfortable role, which they would definitely like. Ultimately, it all depends on how he plays this season and where I think it comes into play with the other two names in the starting lineup, and Paul George and Joel Embiid, on how they look. Because if these players and Paul George and Joel Embiid are just going to continue to be injured and not be out there and not be available for this 76ers team, it is going to be very, very difficult to trade all this dead money without using any young assets or any young picks. And if the 76ers get screwed by that, then they might be having a lot worse problems to be dealing with than a Quentin Grimes scenario with him potentially leaving in free agency. So let's dive into the depth chart and let's explore this 76ers team, as once again, I think it's very, very confusing going into the year, and I don't really necessarily know where they're going to ultimately finish. I have them kind of tossing and turning with some spots, and it ultimately depends on how healthy this team can truly be. If they are healthy, I think they'll be a lot better than what I have them projected. But with Joel Embiid not being healthy his entire career, Paul George not being healthy for the latter half of his career, especially with the Sixers in his first year, I don't have confidence trusting two of the quote-unquote three best players on this team to be healthy and available and ready for this whole entire season. That being said, I do think that they will try to have bounce-back seasons and hope for bounce-back seasons, but we could very well see the blow-up of the 76ers right in front of our face if these guys still continue to be injured. But VJ Edgecomb obviously coming in, third overall pick, looking to make an impact, and I am very excited to see what he could do this season for the 76ers and taking that leap and hopefully pushing them into a next little step. Like I mentioned, Quentin Grimes, the contract dispute, it's going to be key to see how he plays this year and a little bit of a lesser role going into the start of the season. Tyrese Maxey, someone that I think is one of the better guards in the NBA on the offensive end, is going to take another rise this season. Unfortunately, for the 76ers, Jared McCain is once again injured to start off this season, so we will see him dealing with the UCL injury and hopefully a speedy recovery for the young guard after a fantastic start to a rookie season that has not been able to be brought back due to multiple injuries. And then we get into the depth here with the 76ers, which really puts them at confusing points for me because I don't know what they're doing, right? You look at the game today with the 76ers taking on the New York Knicks in Abu Dhabi. Adam Bona is getting more minutes than Andre Drummond, and even though I have Andre Drummond in higher than him in the depth chart, it's just because he's the veteran and I thought he would be getting more minutes, but it's clear as day. The Sixers, once again, don't want these veterans. They don't want these dead money contracts like Eric Gordon, Kyle Lowry, Andre Drummond, making, I believe, $10 million and holding up 3 roster spots when they can have youthful guys in here actually trying to reset the tone here in Philly, which is what I think they need to do. But with Paul George and Joel Embiid basically being untradeable because of their injuries, it's very difficult to get out of that situation. But with that being said, I do think they do have some young players on this bench unit that I think could be very solid. Like I mentioned, Adam Bona as a solid backup big and has really looked pretty well for the Sixers last season. I think if he can get that opportunity over Andre Drummond, it will be clear as day that they need to move off of him. Trendon Watford has looked very good in the past with the Blazers and with the Brooklyn Nets. I would like to see him take a leap, and especially with the Sixers needing and having a hole at this power forward positioning, this would be the player to take that leap. Kelly Oubre has been also a veteran that has been played pretty solid. As we all know, gets a little bit ISO heavy, needs the ball in his hands to be a productive player as he has to score a lot to be effective. So I don't know if that's going to be beneficial for the Sixers. Maybe as just a secondary scorer off the bench that could be very valuable if the Sixers are good. But if the Sixers turned out to be bad, I could see Oubre being a tradable contract for them. And then Justin Edwards is the one that I think is another key one to keep an eye on. I know he plays a little bit of more small forward, but I wanted to give him the props over a guy in Eric Gordon and actually get him into this bench rotation. So I put him at that backup shooting guard. But Justin Edwards is just another slasher, someone that could be impactful for this Sixers team if they really do invest in this youth movement. So as you already heard, I've been preaching the youth movement for the Philadelphia 76ers. I don't want them to have Paul George. I don't want them to have Joel Embiid. I wish they could just strip it all down, be bad, invest in this process, and really build from the ground up. Having guys like McCain, Maxey, Edgecombe, maybe even using Quentin Grimes as a tradable asset to get that power forward or a young center, and even complementing them with Adam Bona to just figure out where this team could really go. But with that all being said, since they do have these veterans that I think they're going to try to win with and try to be a top team in the Eastern Conference, I do think that the Sixers will not be that dominant. I do have them over the Miami Heat, who I broke down yesterday, finishing 10th and being in the last play-in spot here in the Eastern Conference. But ultimately, I could see them switching right and left. The Sixers have more injuries than the Miami Heat. Obviously, the Heat are starting off with injuries to Tyler Hero, but the 76ers are also starting off with injuries to Paul George. So we very well could see the Sixers once again falling into this trap of having George and Embiid being out for a majority of time, maybe McCain dealing with some stuff, and who knows who else, to where they ultimately still continue to tank, be towards the bottom, and show their true colors of last season. But ultimately, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, give them the fact that I do think with Edgecombe coming in, Grimes looking to make some more money and to prove to the Sixers and to the league that he's worth what he commands, that this team will at least be better than what they were last year and actually fight for a play-in spot. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section on the Philadelphia 76ers and your thoughts with this team. Appreciate all the love and support. If you do enjoy the series and do enjoy the channel, so make sure to hit the likes, hit the subscribe, and let me know your thoughts down below. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.